It is the summer of 1954. 22 11-year-old boys arrive at a summer camp nestled in the hills of Oklahoma's Robbers Cave State Park. They come from similar backgrounds: white, middle class, psychologically healthy, carefully screened. They have never met each other before. They are excited. They are ready for 2 weeks of hiking, swimming, baseball, and the particular freedom that comes with being 11 years old and away from home. None of them know that everything about the next 3 weeks has been engineered. The camp staff are researchers. The activities are experiments. The friendships they form, the rivalries that erupt, the hatred that crystallizes between groups of boys who had nothing against each other 3 days earlier. All of it is being watched, recorded, and guided by a social psychologist named Muzafer Sherif, who wants to know one thing. How long does it take to turn boys into enemies? The answer is going to disturb you. Not because it is long, because it is not. Welcome back to the darkest experiments. We have spent 3 chapters watching what authority does to individuals, how it overrides conscience, reshapes identity, and breaks down the defenses of even the most vulnerable. Now we shift our lens from the individual to the group, because human beings do not only exist as individuals. We exist as members of families, communities, teams, nations, tribes, and that membership, it turns out, carries its own very particular kind of danger. The Robbers Cave experiment is the study that mapped that danger with more precision than almost any other in the history of social psychology. And it begins, as so many dark stories do, with something that looks completely innocent. Muzafer Sherif was a Turkish-born social psychologist working at the University of Oklahoma in the early 1950s. He was deeply interested in the psychology of intergroup conflict, in what causes groups of people to develop hostility toward one another, and whether that hostility could be reduced once it had taken hold. His timing was not accidental. The world had just emerged from a war in which intergroup hatred had produced industrial-scale atrocity. The Cold War was hardening the division between East and West into something that felt permanent and existential. And within the United States, racial segregation was being legally challenged for the first time, and the resistance to that challenge was fierce. Sherif wanted to understand the mechanics of prejudice and conflict at their most basic level. He chose boys because they were malleable enough to study without the complicated ideological histories adults carry. And he chose a summer camp because it was a controlled, observable, total environment, a small world he could shape entirely. The 22 boys were divided into 2 groups of 11 and kept completely separate for the first week. Each group was unaware of the other's existence. They hiked together, cooked together, solved problems together, and developed the natural bonds of shared experience. They named themselves. One group became the Eagles, the other the Rattlers. And each developed its own internal culture, its own leaders, its own rituals, and inside jokes. By the end of the first week, both groups had developed strong group identities. They felt genuine loyalty to their group and genuine pride in their membership. They had not yet met the other group. They had not yet been given any reason for rivalry. They were simply 11-year-old boys who had spent a week together. Sherif noted this carefully. The group identity was real, cohesive, and emotionally significant, built through nothing more than shared time and shared tasks. No ideology, no history, no enemy. Then he introduced the enemy. In the second week, the 2 groups were brought together, but only in competitive contexts. Sherif designed a tournament of activities: baseball, tug-of-war, tent pitching competitions. Prizes were offered to the winning group. The losing group received nothing. The effect was rapid and alarming. Within days, the Eagles and the Rattlers were not just competing. They were developing genuine contempt for each other. They called each other names. They raided each other's cabins. The Rattlers burned the Eagles' flag. The Eagles retaliated by ransacking the Rattlers' cabin, overturning beds, tearing down personal possessions. Food fights broke out in the mess hall. Physical confrontations had to be broken up by the research staff, who were, remember, pretending to be ordinary camp counselors the entire time. Boys who had arrived 2 weeks earlier as cheerful strangers were now expressing genuine hostility toward children they had never interacted with except in competition. They described members of the other group as sneaky, cowardly, and untrustworthy. When asked to rate individual boys on positive personality traits, they gave high ratings almost exclusively to members of their own group. Sherif had not told these boys to hate each other. He had not given them a history of grievance or a justifying ideology. He had simply divided them into groups and given them reasons to compete. That was enough. Sherif was not only interested in how conflict begins, he wanted to know how it ends. In the third and final phase of the experiment, he attempted to reduce the hostility between the Eagles and the Rattlers using several different strategies. First, he tried simple contact. He brought the groups together for shared meals, shared movies, shared activities with no competitive element. The result was not reconciliation. It was an escalation of the hostility. The shared meals became occasions for food fights. The proximity without purpose simply gave the boys more opportunities to express the contempt they had already developed. Contact alone, Sherif concluded, was not enough. Simply putting hostile groups in the same room does not reduce conflict. It can intensify it. Then he tried something different. He engineered what he called superordinate goals, challenges that neither group could solve alone, that required genuine cooperation to overcome. The camp's water supply was sabotaged, deliberately by the research team, and the boys had to work together to find and fix the problem. A truck carrying supplies got stuck in the mud and both groups had to pull it out together. A film the boys all wanted to see required both groups to pool their money to rent it. Something shifted. Not immediately, not completely, but measurably. The cooperation required by these shared challenges began to dissolve the rigid group boundaries. Boys started talking across the dividing line. Friendships formed. On the final day of camp, when the boys were asked to choose who they wanted to sit with on the bus home, significant numbers chose to sit with members of the other group. 3 weeks earlier, these same boys had been raiding each other's cabins by night. Now they were choosing each other as companions. The ethical questions surrounding the Robbers Cave experiment are real and worth naming. The boys and their parents were not told the true nature of the camp. Consent was not obtained for participation in what was, at its core, a psychological manipulation. The conflict engineered during Phase 2 caused genuine distress, real fear, real anger, real hurt feelings, in children who were 11 years old and away from home. Sherif and his colleagues took steps to ensure no lasting harm was done, and the resolution phase was designed specifically to repair the damage the conflict phase had caused. But the fact remains that these children were used as experimental subjects without their knowledge, and that the hostility they experienced during the middle week of that camp was real, even though its causes were manufactured. The Robbers Cave experiment is one of the most replicated findings in social psychology, and one of the most immediately applicable to the world we actually live in. It tells us that prejudice does not require a long history of grievance. It does not require cultural indoctrination or ideological justification. It requires only 2 things, a group identity and a competitive structure. Give people a team, give that team an opponent, and the human brain will begin constructing the narrative of difference and superiority almost automatically. This is not a flaw unique to 11-year-old boys in Oklahoma. It is a feature of the human social operating system, visible in workplaces, in politics, in sport, in every domain where groups compete for limited resources or recognition. And Sherif's most important finding, the one that is most urgently needed in a polarized world, is the lesson of the superordinate goal. Telling hostile groups to get along does not work. Putting them in the same room does not work. What works is giving them a problem that neither can solve without the other. A shared challenge that makes the group boundary irrelevant because the goal sits above it. In a world that sometimes feels like it is being sorted into permanent, irreconcilable camps, that finding is not just academically interesting. It is a practical blueprint for the only kind of peace that actually holds. 22 boys went to summer camp in Oklahoma in 1954. They arrived as strangers, became friends, became enemies, and found their way back, not through good intentions alone, but through shared purpose. Muzafer Sherif watched every step of that journey, recorded it carefully, and left the world a map of how group conflict begins and what it actually takes to end it. Next time, we stay with the theme of prejudice, but we move from a summer camp to a 3rd-grade classroom in Iowa. It is April 1968. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated yesterday, and a teacher named Jane Elliott has decided that telling her 8-year-old students about racism is not enough. She is going to let them live it. That is the Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes experiment, and it may be the most emotionally powerful story in this entire series. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Leave a comment below. Did the superordinate goal finding surprise you? Tell me what you think. I'll see you in the next one.